If you're ready to sprinkle fairy dust on your personal brand-based business, the secret is to give it a talkaboutable edge. If you're wondering what I'm talking about when I talk about a talkaboutable edge, that is what we are covering in today's episode, and trust me, this is a game changer. This is part 4 in my series on how to really set a personal brand-based business up for success. I recommend you definitely go back and listen to part 1 if you haven't already, which is all about building businesses rather than projects. Number 2, which is how to niche in a way that doesn't kill your multi-passionate little soul. And part 3, where I talk through the concept of positioning and how to market well and talk to a specific person in order to sell. Now, in order for your lifestyle business to really sing, there is one last little piece of magic that we need to sprinkle on our personal brand. And I do think that this is really the thing that will make it zing if you have the other 3 pieces in place. We're taking what we've conjured up so far and we are giving it a talkaboutable edge. Having a talkaboutable edge for your business is baking the buzz right into the very fabric of your business. It is the thing that makes people stand up and actually pay attention to what it is that you do. I liken this to the it girl or it guy that you kind of see in pop culture come out every now and then. I feel like it's Daisy Edgar Jones at the moment. She's everywhere and she really feels like the it girl. Now, she's sort of this person that feels like she's effortlessly cool and you can't really put your finger on the reason why, and you don't really know why she's the person that has climbed up and she's the cream of the crop, but she just is. The concept of adding a talkaboutable edge into your business is kind of the business equivalent of becoming the it guy or girl in your industry, niche, or space. You're laying very specific and particular foundations that aren't always readily apparent to anyone that's kind of just looking. And they're kind of like, this is amazing. And, when you start talking about your business, they're sitting up and they're paying attention and you can't really figure out what the reason for it is, but they just have that it factor. So that is what we're going for here. I like to think of this as like the invisible cherry on top that is making everything else in your business really zing. It's kind of the difference between having a business where you're posting on social media and it feels like it's just really hard and no one's really paying you attention and you can't figure out why, and actually posting and your posts are really popping. Or pitching a guest podcast and people are like, oh, they don't really get back to you or they ghost you. And it's the difference between that and actually having somebody come back and be like, oh my gosh, I would love to have you on my show. And ultimately, I feel like it's the difference between feeling like you need to beg, borrow, and steal for any kind of attention and actually having a business where that attention is coming to you and it feels like it's happening in an effortless way. Crafting a talkaboutable edge is designed to give your business that kind of vibe. Now, the sad thing is that most businesses have never really been taught how to do this. It's something that is so commonplace in the creative industry space. So TV, book publishing, anything where there is a platform that is, putting out TV shows or books or whatever it is, and they need to get a whole heap of attention. They know how to actually bake the buzz into what it is that they do. But as business owners, we've never really been taught how to do that. So I want to give you a little bit of an example of what it means not to bake the buzz into your business, and then I'm going to show you how to actually do it. So I want you to imagine that you're watching Netflix one night and they come out with an announcement and they say, we are about to release a brand new show and it is going to be amazing. And you're like, amazing, what is this? And it's like, drum roll please. And then they're like, okay, the show is going to be how to automate your investments in 3 simple steps. That would never fly, right? People would be like, well, that's pretty disappointing. That's probably not something I'm going to tune into unless you're like a die-hard personal finance person. So it's an example of an idea that hasn't actually been zhuzhed into something that gives it a talkaboutable edge. Netflix would never do that because they know that they need to bake the buzz into the concepts around the TV shows that they release. So we want to make sure that we're doing that with a business. Now, the thing is, there are business owners that are doing this sort of thing every single day. Let's say, for example, that you are in the personal finance space and you do help people to automate their investments. So you might say, okay, well, I want to get a little bit more attention. I'm going to pitch a guest podcast. And so you go and you create the pitch and you say, hey, I would love to add some value to your audience and show them how they can automate their investments in 3 simple steps. And then you just get absolutely nothing back and you wonder why. Or you create a social media post and it's like, here are 3 simple steps for automating your investments. And it gets not really much engagement, even though you spent like 28 minutes putting together a Canva carousel, right? I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this. So what we actually want to do is take this concept or this idea, really, it's an idea of, in this example, automating your investments in 3 simple steps and actually build and bake a talkaboutable edge into it. Now, I have very specifically used this example because there is someone in the online business space that teaches this. I mean, there is a lot of people that teach it, but there is one person that has really risen to the top of what it is that he does because he understands this concept of baking a talkaboutable edge into what it is that he does. That person is Ramit Sethi. Now, you might know him from his New York Times best-selling book. You might know him from his Netflix series. He actually also has an online business. Now, he teaches people just that, how to automate their investments. But he has risen to the very top of what it is that he does. He makes millions of dollars a year. He has this, best-selling book. He has a Netflix series because he doesn't actually talk about automating your investments when he talks about his business. Here is what he does instead. He has created a talkaboutable edge by instead focusing on the concept of living a rich life. Now, I'm going to read a quote excerpt from his website that positions the way that he talks about automated investing. And when I do, I want you to think about how it makes you feel and whether it makes you sit up and pay attention. So he says, living a small life is a tragedy. Why does typical money advice focus on restrictions? Don't buy lattes, don't go on vacations, don't get new jeans, just eat asparagus and hoard your money and maybe you can use it when you turn 80. Here's a radical thought. What if you used your money to say yes? Living your rich life isn't about frugality. There are plenty of sites that will lecture you about disabling your oven light to save 11 cents per year, and a $5 coffee is not going to change your financial life. But learning how to automatically invest and select the right asset allocation and negotiate a $15,000 raise will. Ask $30,000 questions, not $3 ones. See how this flips the idea of automated investing, which is pretty vanilla, completely on its head, and it gives you a sense of wanting to know more. It feels interesting. It doesn't feel like something that you're just like, that's not very interesting at all. That is ultimately what we want. That is how you bake a talkaboutable edge into the very fabric of your business. So if you want to know how to do that for your business, listen in because I'm about to share the steps for doing it. Step number 1 is that you want to define your thought leadership. So what is thought leadership? I always say this. You might have heard me say it before if you've listened to the podcast or followed me for any period of time. But what thought leadership is the name is in the title, leading the thought inside of your industry. Thought leadership is the absolute foundation of a personal brand because it takes you from being a commodity, which you absolutely do not want to be, into being something that is differentiated because you have a unique perspective. So a commodity is something that is easily replicatable. And so if you're talking about the same things and you've got the same methodology and everything is exactly the same as other people in your industry, you're likely going to compete on price or you need to be the best. And we've talked about that in some of the other editions inside of this series. It's not a place that you ultimately want to be. You want to differentiate that. And as a personal brand, the best way to do that is with your thought leadership, quite literally leading the thought in your industry. So when it comes to developing a talkaboutable edge, we're going to start here. And it really is the most essential foundations of developing a talkaboutable edge, but developing a personal brand at all. So let me walk through the steps quickly of how do you actually lead the thought in your industry? Because it's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to, sit down at your computer on a Monday and you need to create a podcast, or you need to come out with a piece of content, or you need to, develop a pitch for your business. And you're kind of like, okay, well, I need this thought leadership thing, but how do I actually go about doing it? I'm going to give you some really concrete steps. So number one, you want to identify a big problem with what I call the status quo inside of your industry, or with what it is that you do. So in order to do this, and as we go through the steps, I want you to actually take out a piece of paper or just open up a Google Doc and create two tables. And on the left-hand table column, you're going to go through this exercise, which is step one of identifying a big problem with the status quo inside of your industry. So what do I mean by a big problem with the status quo? Well, likely there is a common way of doing things, or there are certain ways that people consider that things have always been done, or there are things that are broken inside of your industry that if you were to really sit down and think about it, likely your clients are thinking it, likely there is just this real kind of status quo. Now, I used to work in real estate, and so I could rattle off a whole heap of these things, right? The issues that people had with real estate agents, the issues that they had with the real estate sales process, the issues that they had with, the tired old ways of doing things. And so you want to go through this thought exercise of just listing all of those things out. Now, I'll give you some questions to use as prompts as you go through this exercise. Number one, what is broken in your industry? Number two, what is something that is wrong with the standard way that things are done, or the way that things have always been done? And number three, what are some of the tired old ways that other businesses or other ways of doing the thing that it is that you do have always been done? Now, these are all ultimately the enemy, right? And so your job is to highlight what they are so that you can go into step two, which you're going to list out in the other column inside of your table. So step number two is to then flip all of that kind of problems, the things that are, a bit broken with the status quo, you're going to flip them on their head. So the way that you're going to do that is take the things that are broken in your industry, the things that have always just been done a certain way, the frustrations that people have, and you're going to come up with a new way of doing things. This is going to be your better way. This is going to be the mission that, you're going to be helping people go from this old way, this tired old industry, the way that things have always been done, into a new way. Now, I'll use Ramit Sethi's business and his approach to doing this as an example, because he absolutely uses this process in developing his thought leadership and crafting his talkaboutable edge. So one of the things that he is really against in terms of one of the tired old ways of doing things is the real focus in personal finance on frugality, on cutting back, on limiting yourself. And he then positions his better way as this concept of living a rich life and cutting back, yes, on the things that you don't value, but then spending on the things that feel important to you. Now, the difference is really night and day. It is the difference between a personal finance expert that comes out and says, cut back and budget and do all of these things, and they feel so restrictive, and you probably already tried those things and it hasn't worked, and it just feels like, oh, I've heard this before. And I'm going to read here exactly what he says. He says, I teach you how to design your rich life. Design the life you've always imagined without pinching pennies. Spend confidently on the things you love and cut back mercilessly on the things that you don't. Now, you can feel the difference there in just how that feels, right? It is thought leadership. He's leading the thought. He's taking something that is an old way of doing things and he's introducing a new way that feels exciting and it feels different. And it sounds like something that you want to get on board with if you have the problem of wanting to, build your personal finances. And that's the whole point. The right people, the people that are tired of the old way and the status quo, they're going to be looking for someone that is willing to lead the thought and show them a new way. Now, the big thing with this is that you're not actually going to have everyone come on board with this. There are going to be people that are like, I don't actually agree with that. And that is the whole point. You want to have an element of polarization in what it is that you do. Now, this isn't just like throwing rocks at people and, talking down on other people's approaches. It is more talking about the status quo with things like the industry and the way of doing things and focusing more on this new way that you're able to kind of pioneer. Now, step number one, once you have developed your thought leadership using this framework, is that you want to then have a mission around what it is that you do. So thought leadership is how you develop a unique perspective, and your mission is then how you make that about more than just you. So if you just go out and you start talking about your business and what it is that you can help people do, right, it makes you feel very businessy. And in a certain context, for example, when you're selling your actual offers, that is important. You want to make sure that you can communicate how you solve a problem for people. But in terms of like the business on a wider basis, in terms of how you get attention and potentially PR and how you start to get people on board with your business and to start to feel passionately about it and actually start to give you that attention that later allows you to talk about your offers, a really great idea, if you can do it, is to make what you do mission-based. So, for example, with Ramit Sethi, he could say something along the lines of, I'm on a mission to help 1,000 people to design and live their rich lives. Stop pinching pennies and design and live their rich lives. Something along those lines. See how it takes it away from kind of just being something that he's teaching and it's ultimately about him, and it actually makes it kind of more broader and it makes it like mission-based and it makes it something where it's like the business exists for more than just what it is that it actually does on a smaller level. Now, this isn't an essential part of this, but it can be really, really powerful if you can find a way to make what you do mission-based, because it allows you to talk about it and have people really get behind what it is that you do. Now, step number 3 is then to develop your concept. So once you have your thought leadership, once you have your mission on lock, we get to what I think is the really exciting part, which is developing a concept around what it is that you do. Now, a concept is something that is different to a mere idea. So let me explain the difference between ideas and concepts. An idea is a commodity, right? Anyone can have an idea. So I want to help you automate your investing, for example. A concept is something that takes that idea and puts a unique spin or a unique lens or a unique perspective around it. It becomes something that makes people stand up and pay attention. Now, like I said earlier, concepts are something that is just stock standard inside of the creative industries world. If you've ever worked in an advertising agency, you would be very aware of what a concept is, right? It takes an idea and it makes it unique. It puts a lens on it that gives it a sense of specificity, a sense of a talkaboutable edge that makes it really pop and stand out. And this really is the secret to attention with your business. Now, I love this example of Ramit because not only does he have his business where he has a unique concept baked into the business and he has an online business, and so we resonate with him for what it is that he does, but he's so good at this that he has taken this concept of what he does and he has actually brought it into the creative industries world. He has been picked up by Netflix. He has been picked up by a book publisher, and that, book has gone on to be a New York Times bestseller because he so intimately understands this concept of how to take an idea. So an idea is like automating your investing, and how to then turn it into a concept that is going to garner attention because it has buzz baked right into the fabric of it. So I'm going to show you how he did this with a book and with a Netflix series so that you can start to see how concept works. So with the book's title is How to Get Rich, And the byline is financial detective. Oh, sorry, this is the Netflix show. So How to Get Rich. Financial detective Ramit Sethi embarks on a mission, there we go, to help 7 families fix their money problems and make their lives richer in just 6 weeks. So you can see how it takes this concept of like automating your investing, automating your savings, and that's just an idea that anyone could have, but he's put it into this unique concept that feels exciting. You want to see what these 7 families are going to do. You want to see what happens next. And that's kind of how it got picked up by Netflix, and it became something that had attention by virtue of the concept itself, rather than needing to try and get people to give you attention by having an idea. It's the wrong way to go about it. You want to bake that attention grabbing element into the actual idea itself. So the book is called I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and the byline is stop pinching pennies, boost your income, spend on the things you love, cut back mercilessly on the things you don't, and live your life rich life in 6 weeks. So pretty similar to his business, which makes sense. There's an alignment there. But you can see how he's taken his thought leadership, he's developed a mission, and then he's crafted a concept which is very different to an idea, which is something that anyone that can have. It doesn't have any attention in and of itself, or it's not worthy of attention in and of itself. And he's made it attention grabbing because it's this new lens, it's this new perspective, it's something that people are crying out for, and it feels interesting. So we want to take this concept of concepts, which is so common in the advertising world, in book publishing, in movies and TV, and we want to bring it to our business. The reason for that is that it makes everything else that we do so much easier. All of these tactics like posting on social and trying to pitch podcasts and trying to get attention and get PR, and all of that will just become so much easier because we have this talkaboutable edge as our foundations. And so the final step here is then to infuse your concept into everything that you do as a personal brand. So a few ways that you can be looking at doing this. Number one is your pitch. So how you actually talk to people about your business. If you really talk about it through the lens of your concept, you're going to get people to stand up and pay attention and be like, that is so cool, right? So we did talk about this a little bit in a previous edition in this series where we talked about how to actually come up with a statement that stands out in and of itself. And that's a great way to talk about your offers. But when you're actually talking about your business, it's so powerful to make it mission-based because you get people on board with it. They're like, oh my gosh, I want to know more about this. Tell me more. Or I want to, be associated with that particular business. Like you can think of the businesses that do this, right? The businesses that feel like they're more than just what it is that they do. Number two is when you're trying to get attention for your business. So when you're pitching for PR, when you're pitching for guest podcast spots, when you're, basically trying to get eyes on your business, you want to lead with your concept. So instead of pitching, I can come on your podcast and talk about automating investing. I can provide so much value to your audience. You actually want to flip that on its head and you want to be able to talk about your concept. So, I'm on a mission to help over 1,000 business owners to ditch the frugal spending and actually live their rich life. Which one do you think is going to get a little bit more attention? And the other secret to this as well is that if you do this in the right way, you can actually have your competitors become your collaborators because the lens that you've put on what it is that you do is so inherently different that they actually want to feature you on their platform anyway. And then finally, you can use your concept or the concept of concepts in your long form content. So whether you have a podcast or a blog or a YouTube channel, we're really past the days these days where you can just start one and just start interviewing people or just start creating content about random things. Those days in terms of getting maximum attention are kind of gone. And so what you want to do is think about how you can actually create a concept that mirrors the bigger concept for your business and use it to craft long form content that actually gets attention. So a really good example of somebody that does this really well is James Clear. So James Clear has a newsletter. I subscribe to the newsletter. It is called the 321 newsletter, but he has done a great job of developing a talkaboutable edge around what he does. Interestingly, he also has a New York Times bestseller. So these business owners that understand concepts just know how to get attention. But basically, his concept is really around this old way, being that productivity is so hard because you've got to push yourself and you've got to try and do these big things. His new way is really just about like these tiny little actions compounding on each other over time. And this concept of, the mission being to help more people become 1% better every day. And so then his newsletter is mirroring his concept. And so it's a 3-to-1 newsletter where he has, I think, 3 short ideas, 2 quotes, and then a question to ponder. So it's just like short and actionable, and it kind of mirrors what his mission is. And so he has like a concept around his long form content that people can get on board with. Now, that is something that you can think about regardless of the type of long form content that you create. But, rather than, for example, let's take personal finance, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but let's say that you have a business where you help people to automate their finances, rather than just creating, for example, a podcast where you share tips on how to automate your finances, you might actually have as your old way the fact that, you might have as your market women or maybe marginalized women. And you could have and somebody who actually does this really well is Ellen Yin, by the way, just came to mind, but she does this in a really savvy way. So, for example, hers isn't about personal finance, but hers, I think, is about business. So I might use this as an example. But, she helps marginalized women to basically build businesses with financial transparency baked in. And so I guess the old way there is like people not sharing their numbers and being really closed up about, all things finance when it comes to business. Her new way is really that concept of financial transparency. And then the mission around that is empowering women to, have this financial transparency to build their businesses. And so her podcast is really around financially transparent conversations. And I'm like, that is amazing because it is putting a lens on just interviewing business owners, right? So it's completely different to these interview shows and these how-tos and all of the things. And it actually gives this really interesting, unique perspective to the conversations that are being had. And so that's where you want to get to with all elements of your business. And to summarize, that is what a talkaboutable edge ultimately is. It takes this idea that you have, and it takes all of the work that you've done in the previous editions of this personal brand series where you've defined your niche and you have a project and you know how to position it to one particular market. And it sprinkles that fairy dust on it and makes it stand out by virtue of being different because it has a unique lens. It ultimately is a business that you could wrap a Netflix show around or, get a book deal on. And that is what we want. We want to have that buzz baked into the very fabric of what it is that we do because it makes everything that you layer on top so much more powerful. So there you have it. Just to summarize this particular episode, we've gone through how to bake a talkaboutable edge into your business. And we've gone through the steps that are involved or required in order to do that. We've talked about defining your thought leadership and a really practical exercise for leading the thought in your industry. We've gone through how to then make it mission-based. And then number 3, how to then develop a concept around it and use it with everything that you do. So how you pitch your business, how you get PR and attention and eyes on your business, and how you set up your long form content as well. I think that sometimes when it comes to everything that we've talked about in this series, we can rush past it or not give it the intention and attention that it ultimately deserves. And then those problems can then manifest later on when we're posting on social media or we're pitching podcasts or we're doing whatever it is and it's falling flat when actually it's having these foundations that are going to make your personal brand set up for success from the outset that will ultimately have a flow-on effect for everything that you do downwind. So that wraps this particular series. I hope that you have absolutely loved it. If you have, please subscribe so that you can get future episodes. And I will likely be taking some of my own advice around this very shortly and zhuzhing certain elements of my personal brand. So you can keep an eye out for those. If you like the written in-depth content on some of the things that we've spoken about, I've actually written a lot of this out over on my Substack. So I'm going to put a link to my Substack somewhere below this so that you can check it out if you kind of are like, wow, we covered a lot and I want to know a little bit more. I need to sit down and study this stuff. You can definitely do that over on my Substack as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear from you inside of my Instagram. It is at StevieDillon_. And I would love to know what else you would like me to create content on, because now that this series is over, I am open to ideas. All right, guys, until next time, I'll see you then.